The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Jefferson Park, bathing the old oak trees in a golden glow. The breeze carried the laughter of children playing tag, the rustle of leaves, and the soft squeak of swings swaying back and forth. On a weathered bench near the pond sat an elderly man, his hands resting on a polished wooden cane, his gaze fixed not so much on the ducks in the water, but on something far beyond the horizon. His name was Henry Carter, though most who knew him in the neighborhood simply called him Mr. Carter. His hair, cropped close, had long since surrendered to silver, and deep lines etched his face like the chapters of a book most people never bothered to read. To strangers, he was just another old man enjoying the peace of the park. But to those who took the time to ask, he carried with him stories of deserts, jungles, and battlefields, stories of survival, of brotherhood, of loss. Henry was a veteran, not the kind who talked about it for glory, but the kind who had bled for the nation, who had stared death in the eye so that others might live. He had fought in places most people couldn't find on a map, saved comrades when hope was thin, and returned home not to parades, but to quiet prejudice and doors slammed in his face. And yet he carried himself with dignity. Every morning he came to this park with a newspaper folded neatly under his arm, sat on the same bench, and watched life move on around him. This day, however, life decided to remind him that not everyone had moved on. The crunch of heavy boots against gravel broke his quiet reflection. Henry didn't move at first. He had learned long ago that trouble often revealed itself without invitation. From the corner of his eye, he saw the shadow fall across him before he saw the man. A white police officer, tall, broad-shouldered, his mirrored sunglasses catching the sun, his hand resting almost casually on the holster at his hip. "Afternoon," the officer said, though his tone carried none of the politeness the word suggested. "Can I see some ID?" Henry slowly lifted his gaze, his voice calm, deep, and measured. "ID? For sitting in a park?" The officer's lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "This area's been getting reports of suspicious individuals, loitering, causing uncomfort to families." He leaned forward slightly. "You fit the description." Henry's grip on his cane tightened just enough to whiten his knuckles, but his expression remained unreadable. "The description," he repeated softly, as if testing the words. "And what would that be, officer?" The cop shrugged, his eyes hidden by the sheen of his glasses. "Older male, dark clothing, black." The word hung in the air like a hammer blow, though Henry had heard it all his life. To the officer, it was casual, a justification, a shield. To Henry, it was another reminder that the battles he fought overseas had never truly ended. They had only changed uniforms. "I've been coming to this park longer than you've been alive," Henry said. His voice carried no anger, only the weight of truth. "Never once have I caused anyone trouble." "Then it shouldn't be a problem to show ID, should it?" The officer's tone grew sharper, his stance more rigid. "If you got nothing to hide, you'll cooperate." Henry exhaled slowly, the kind of sigh that carried decades of exhaustion. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his worn leather wallet, and opened it. Inside were faded photos of his late wife, his children, and tucked carefully behind them a military identification card, one that bore medals, service dates, and the unmistakable seal of the United States Armed Forces. He held it up steady and firm. "This is who I am." The officer snatched it with little regard, scanning it briefly. His eyes narrowed. "Military, huh? Doesn't change the fact that you're sitting here, taking up space, making people uneasy." Henry's jaw tightened. For a moment, he saw flashes of his past, nights spent crawling through mud while bullets hissed overhead, mornings when he carried wounded men on his shoulders, their blood soaking through his uniform. He remembered the comrades who never came home, the flags folded and handed to widows, and the silence that followed. And here he was, decades later, being told he was taking up space. "Are you going to tell me to leave?" Henry asked quietly. The officer adjusted his belt, puffing his chest. "I'm not asking, old man. I'm telling. You can either leave now or I'll make you leave." Several park-goers had begun to notice the scene, their whispers drifting like wind. A young mother clutched her child closer. Two teenagers pulled out their phones, their screens glowing as they started recording. The officer noticed, but seemed unfazed. Perhaps he thought the badge gave him immunity from judgment. Henry slowly stood up, leaning on his cane, his tall frame still commanding despite his age. His eyes, a steely gray, locked onto the officer's. "You think because you wear that uniform, you can decide who belongs and who doesn't? You've mistaken age for weakness and skin for guilt." His voice carried like distant thunder. "Be careful, son. You don't know who you're talking to." The officer chuckled, though unease flickered briefly across his face. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. Just another old man who needs to learn his place." The crowd around them grew thicker, whispers louder, phones raised higher. Henry felt the weight of eyes on him, the weight of history pressing against his chest. He had learned long ago that dignity was the greatest weapon against ignorance. But sometimes ignorance had to be taught a lesson it would never forget. And in that moment, Henry Carter decided this young cop was about to learn exactly what regret felt like. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. The officer stood, squared shoulders and hand hovering near his holster, as if daring Henry to resist. The crowd leaned in, sensing that something significant was unraveling before them. Henry did not move quickly. Every action was deliberate, measured, born of years where hesitation meant death. He lowered himself back onto the bench, resting his cane across his lap, and looked up at the officer with a calmness that was almost defiant. "I'm not leaving," he said simply. A murmur rippled through the bystanders. The officer's jaw clenched. "You don't get to decide that. This park isn't your living room." Henry tilted his head, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "And it's not your personal property either, officer. This is public land. I fought for it. I bled for it. And I'll sit here until the sun goes down if I choose." The officer's composure cracked, his cheeks flushing red. "Don't test me, old man. You think anyone here's going to side with you?" He gestured vaguely at the gathering crowd, but his confidence faltered when he saw more phones raised, more people watching closely. The officer barked, "All right, that's enough. Stand up, hands where I can see them. You're trespassing and refusing lawful orders. That's grounds for removal." Henry gave a low chuckle, the kind that didn't carry humor, but rather the weight of bitter irony. "Trespassing on the soil I defended while men like you were still learning how to ride bicycles." One of the teenagers in the crowd shouted, "Hey, leave him alone! He's not doing anything!" A few others echoed, voices gaining courage in numbers. The officer spun toward them, his authority cracking like a whip. "Everyone back up, now!" But the tide was shifting. Henry had seen it before, the moment when numbers turned the balance, when the crowd's quiet compliance hardened into resistance. He remained seated, as calm as a storm gathering strength. "Son," Henry said firmly, his voice carrying over the murmurs, "do you know what that card you held in your hand meant? That wasn't just plastic. That was sacrifice. That was loyalty. That was blood spilled in the dirt of countries whose names you can't pronounce. Men trusted me with their lives. I saved them when all hope was gone. And now you, a boy with a badge and a gun, think you can strip me of dignity? You don't have that power." The officer sneered, but for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. "You think being a soldier makes you untouchable?" "No," Henry said, leaning forward on his cane, his voice dropping to a quiet, razor-sharp tone. "But it makes me unforgettable." The silence that followed was heavy, charged. The bystanders stared, caught between awe and outrage. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice spoke up. "Wait a second, I know him. That's Sergeant Henry Carter. My grandfather used to tell me about him. He saved his whole unit back in Nam." The officer stiffened, scanning the crowd nervously. Another voice chimed in, an older man stepping forward, tears brimming in his eyes. "He saved me," the man said hoarsely. "You don't know who you're disrespecting. That man's a hero." The crowd gasped. Whispers erupted. Phones zoomed in. Faces captured. Evidence sealed in digital permanence. The officer's authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. He reached for control, barking louder. "Back off! All of you! This doesn't concern you!" But it did. It concerned everyone now. Henry slowly stood again, taller this time, his back straightened as though years melted off him. The weight of recognition buoyed him, gave him strength. His voice boomed, not from volume, but from resonance, the kind that silenced rooms and commanded attention. "You want me gone, officer? You'll have to drag me through the same ground I defended for this country. You'll have to tell these people that the uniform I once wore means nothing, and you'll have to look me in the eye while you do it." The officer's hands trembled. His training told him to act, to assert dominance, to shut this down before it spiraled further. But his gut twisted. He could feel control slipping. The older man who had spoken stepped closer, placing a hand on Henry's shoulder with reverence. "Sergeant Henry," he said, his voice breaking, "I never thought I'd see you again. You carried me out when everyone thought I was gone. I never got to thank you." Henry's eyes softened briefly. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "You owe me truth, and truth doesn't hide." The officer's radio crackled suddenly, the dispatcher's voice calling his unit number. He fumbled to answer, his voice shaky. 10-4, dispatch, I'm dealing with—" His words faltered as he realized dozens of live streams were already broadcasting the scene across social media. Henry saw it in his face, the dawning realization that this moment would not fade. This would not be swept aside, and for the first time that afternoon, Henry smiled, not with joy, but with the quiet certainty of a man who knew the tables had turned. The officer's regret had only just begun. The officer's radio hissed again, demanding his response, but the noise of the crowd drowned out everything. What had begun as a routine flex of authority was now a storm, one that even his badge could not shield him from. Phones were everywhere, held high like glowing torches, every word, every gesture streaming to countless screens beyond Jefferson Park. Henry stood, steady on his cane, the weight of his years suddenly an armor rather than a burden. The sunlight caught the worn edges of his military ID as he held it aloft, showing the crowd. "This is who I am. Sergeant Henry Carter, 2nd Battalion. I didn't survive wars overseas just to be told I don't belong at home." A hush fell across the park. Children stopped their play. Parents leaned closer, and the officer's face drained of color. He looked from Henry to the crowd, then back again, his lips twitching as he scrambled for control. "This doesn't change the fact," he began, but his words faltered under the sheer weight of silence. Every eye burned into him, not with obedience, but with judgment. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You asked me to leave a park I fought to keep free. You treated me like a threat while forgetting that freedom rests on the shoulders of men like me. And you call yourself law, but all I see is fear wearing a uniform." The words struck like blows. The older man who had recognized Henry stepped forward again, his voice firm. "Officer, do you know what this man did? He saved lives in the Mekong Delta. He pulled men out under fire when everyone else had given up. My father told me those stories like gospel, and you're out here treating him like a criminal?" The crowd erupted, murmurs turning to shouts, voices demanding accountability. "Show him respect," someone cried. "He's a hero," another added. The officer's radio crackled once more, this time with urgency. "Unit 42, report. We're getting multiple civilian complaints from Jefferson Park. Command wants a status update." His hand trembled as he pressed the mic. "This is Unit 42. Situation's under control." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. The situation had slipped away, and the world was watching. Henry turned slowly, facing the gathering circle of people. His posture was regal, his voice strong. "All my life, I've been told where I could sit, where I could walk, where I could live. I wore this country's flag on my chest, and still I came home to chains, chains of suspicion, chains of hate. But today, in this park, I say enough. I belong here. We all belong here." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then building into thunder. Tears streaked down faces, strangers clasped hands, and children stared wide-eyed at the old man who suddenly seemed larger than life. The officer's composure shattered. He reached for his radio again, but Henry's gaze froze him in place. "Go on," Henry said softly, but everyone heard it. "Call for backup. Call your captain. Call whoever you want. But remember this. Every word, every action is already out there. You can't erase what you've done." And it was true. Notifications pinged on phones in the crowd, live streams climbing, hashtags forming, the officer's name and face already circulating. By tomorrow morning, the world would know. The officer's regret wasn't just about the confrontation anymore. It was about what came next. The suspension, the investigation, the hearings. He could see his career collapsing before his eyes, all because he had underestimated an old man on a bench. Henry stepped closer, his cane tapping against the path with authority. He leaned in just enough for the officer alone to hear. "You wanted to make me invisible. Instead, I've made you unforgettable for all the wrong reasons." The officer flinched, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. The crowd parted as Henry began to walk, slow but steady, his head high, the applause following him like a procession. Children ran alongside, parents nodded respectfully, and the man whose life Henry had once saved saluted through tears. By the time Henry reached the edge of the park, the officer was no longer the center of attention. He stood alone, sweating beneath the weight of his uniform, his authority stripped away not by force, but by truth. And Henry? He didn't look back. Revenge had been served, not with anger, but with dignity so powerful it left scars deeper than any wound. The officer would carry that regret for the rest of his days. For Henry Carter, the war was long over, but in that park, on that day, he won one last battle, and this time the whole world bore witness.